If you have any good ideas for improving the content, I'd love to read them in the comments. Love. What celebrity death saddened you the most? Lance Reddick. A friend talked me into seeing John Wick 4 and I really loved everything Lance had been in and was excited to go. Then he just passed away, which really saddened me as it was so unexpected. R.I.P. Commander. Jim Henson. Too early AMD, such a source of joy to so many. Yes. Every time I go to Hollywood Studios at Walt Disney World, I have to go to the Muppets 3D movie. It was the last thing he did as Kermit. It makes me sad that he died before the paperwork with Disney was complete, and because of that a lot of the plans for the Muppets at that park never happened. Watch his funeral on PBS. It's one of the best celebrations of a human's life you can see. Mr. Rogers. It was pouring rain that morning and I'd stopped to grab breakfast before a looming nightmare commute to work. Right as I was about to pull the key out of the ignition, I heard them say on the radio that he'd passed and just sat there in my car, sobbing. I met him in 1983 when he came to my elementary school with the purple panda, and for a 4-year-old, it was like meeting Jesus. I was so overcome I just blurted out, "You're my best friend," and he smiled and said, "I'm so glad that we're friends. We didn't deserve Fred Rogers." My parents were mildly abusive. It was only because of Mr. Rogers that I knew something was wrong in my household. The amount of love he shared with people on the other side of the TV was awe-inspiring. I think if someone tried to do that today they'd come off as insincere or try hard. My dad was an abusive POS. Mr. Rogers was a male figure in my life that I could trust. I think he's the celebrity the world needs most right now. Though I think he'd be so disappointed in all of us to see how we treat each other. I still remember where I was when I heard he'd passed away. My high school band was at Disney World. I can't remember what park we were at that day, but there was a bust there of Mr. Rogers that was already covered in flowers when we got there that morning, and people of all ages were stopping there to pay their respects even though it was raining. It just showed how truly beloved he was that so many generations felt like they'd lost a friend when he passed. Alan Rickman. My first movie intro to him was the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and I still threatened to take someone's heart out with a spoon. God's rest his soul. Steve Irwin. Sean Locke and Shane Warne were a big kick in the balls as well. Sean, you could see he was ill, so unfortunately, wasn't a huge shock, but still a massive loss. I must watch something with him in daily. Also a loss for me, Rick Mayall. Anton Yelchin. Dude had cystic fibrosis. And that isn't even what killed him. He's my go-to for this question. Poor guy had the whole world in front of him. He was in great movies, hell, even his voice work in Trollhunters was great. And the way he went is just so random and awful. Not to say other deaths aren't tragic, but I think his was more so when compared to the natural death of someone 99 years old, or a drug-related death of someone, or someone taking their own life. Heath Ledger. In 8th grade English class we read Taming of the Shrew, and then the teacher let us watch 10 Things I Hate About You to show us how his works still impact writing today. So I had just discovered Heath and had a massive crush on him when he passed away less than a year later. It was the first celebrity death that really impacted me. John Ritter. John Ritter is the only celebrity death that I've ever cried about. It was so sudden and unexpected, and he had seemed so nice. I cried all throughout the episode of 8 Simple Rules where they showed his TV family grieving his loss. Chris Cornell. So talented, gone too soon and died so tragically. I saw him and Chester Bennington in 2007 together. Hell of a show. They're the reason I never hesitate to say yes to a concert now. Grant Imahara. His death was so random and unexpected I genuinely didn't believe he died. For a couple days after it happened I was silently convinced it was an internet prank. Watching the videos of Adam Savage touring his workshop was really hard too. Aneurysm is silent killer. Even perfectly healthy person can get it suddenly, sometimes during the night. It's terrifying. You just go to sleep and never wake up again, because of the faulty vein in your brain. Sir Terry Pratchett. He and his works both made the world a better, more interesting place. Terry Pratchett is and always will be my favorite author. He could make me laugh and cry in the same sentence. Even now, years later, when I reread his books I find references or subtleties I missed the last time. He died towards the end of my pregnancy with my youngest. It was a horrible, very traumatic pregnancy and very dark time for me. His death made it worse, especially as his books always brought comfort. It has been several years since then and I still cannot bring myself to read the last book as I am still not ready for it to be over. I bought the last book when it came out. Still can't bring myself to read it. Norm. I didn't even know he was sick. Passed away in September too. Reminds me of that tragedy. Norm was the first celebrity death to bring me to tears. I loved Norm, loved his podcast, watched all his clips on YouTube, his TV shows, dirty work, his late-night appearances, his stand-up and weekend updates. My friends and I quote him all the time. He was a true professor of logic. His death reminds me of that tragedy. I didn't even know he was sick. He no longer is serving a youthful purpose. Hold the fort. He hated Jews. Chris Farley. Nothing like crying in front of your Christmas tree. Watched Chris Rock talk about his death on the Howard Stern show from like 15 years ago or something. He talked about how frustrating the inevitability of it felt. He said that the people that he was really mad at and would never forgive are the people who kept him just sober enough to keep making them money. You know, producers and people like that. Those cunts. They'd acknowledge the seriousness of his addictions/other issues by sticking him in rehab, then act like he was cured 30 days later and throw him back into some production until he'd inevitably relapse and the process would start again. Anthony Bourdain. I miss his snarky attitude. I think it hit me because as a pessimistic sort of generally melancholy sort of person, I saw within him a kindred spirit with similar tastes and hobbies and etc. Seeing someone who kind of has an idealized version of a life I'd want and that they couldn't handle it and make it out of here so to speak, it kind of dampens the morale a bit when it comes to your own chances of finding peace and happiness. It's hard rewatching all his stuff now. Some of the things that he said really made me sit up and think to myself that we all missed the signs and taught me to listen to people more carefully. Leonard Nimoy. I was looking for his name. I have only recently started watching Star Trek by the request of my boyfriend and Spock immediately became my favorite character. I looked him up on Google one day and found out he has been dead for the past 8 years. Cameron Boyce. So young. This one upset me a lot. Not on everyone's radar, because he was a Disney kid. Definitely a shock when it happened. I'm older but my kids are at an age where we spend a ton of time watching Jessie and those Descendant movies. Basically watched that kid grow up. He was ridiculously talented, had comedic timing down, could dance crazy good, and he just seemed like an all-around good human being. Didn't deserve to go that young. So unfair. Brittany Murphy. The documentary put out on her made it seem so preventable. Her story truly hurt my heart. Looking at this post, I see a lot of names that make me think the same. It really makes me think about how so many stars are used and manipulated for their worth, with no regard given to their personal health. If one or two strong friends or family members had stepped up and said/done something, we'd still have some of these people. RIP. Edit. Doc name is what happened, Brittany Murphy? Chester Bennington. Losing Chris Cornell and Chester is quickly, and the context of their friendship was/is truly devastating. Carrie Fisher. Followed immediately by Debbie Reynolds. I felt so bad for Billy Lord. Robin Williams. I love that man. I'm still pretty torn up about him and Steve Irwin. Naya Rivera. Not her fan, but the way she died was really tragic. Thinking of her child left alone on that boat for hours looking for his mama hurts my chest. God, yes. I was a fan, but the worst part wasn't even because I was her fan. It was imagining her realizing the water was too strong and panicking, doing everything she could to get her kid to safety. It must have been terrifying and so painful for her in those last moments, being scared and thinking her kid would be alone or looking for her. God, this family deserves so much better. David Bowie. That would be my pick. Knowing he made his last album, released it, and then died 3 days later, it was beyond spooky, but also really cool and creative. Bernie Mac. Taylor Hawkins. Philip Seymour Hoffman. Chadwick Boseman R.I.P. Black Panther. He was just a year older than me and died from cancer just a few days before I had my cancer surgery. That one hit hard. Wakanda forever. That was a holy shit, seriously? Moment when I learned he passed. But you could see how sick he was, especially in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Mac Miller. Gone too soon. I still get sad when his songs come on. Ick if it was 'cause we were so close in age. He got famous while I was in high school and everybody would play his mixtapes and albums, and as I got older my taste for music changed, but so did Mac Miller's. It was incredible realizing how much he evolved and the quality of music he was putting out. One of the best of his generation and gone too soon. Thank you for watching. In the comments below the video you can write which celebrity's death upset you the most.